World War II left deep scars on humanity, but some wounds never came to light. While history books document the battles, the treaties, and the trials of war criminals, there are parts of this conflict that remain shrouded in mystery. Documents were burned, facilities were destroyed, and witnesses vanished before they could tell their stories. In the final days of the Third Reich, as Berlin stood on the brink of collapse and the Soviet army advanced without mercy, the Nazis weren't just trying to survive, they were erasing evidence. Secret bunkers were sealed. Research was destroyed. Scientists were executed so that none of their discoveries would fall into Allied hands. But not everything was lost. Among the darkest secrets of Nazi Germany, one mystery stands out, one that continues to spark both fascination and fear. Die Glocke. The bell. According to conspiracy theories and fragments of recovered wartime documents, Die Glocke wasn't a conventional weapon. It wasn't a tank, a fighter jet, or a rocket like Werner von Braun's V-2s. It was something else, something never seen before. The true purpose of this mysterious device was never officially confirmed, but the most disturbing theories suggest the Nazis were attempting to manipulate time and space. Die Glocke was allegedly developed deep within the ultra-secretive Der Ries complex, a massive underground facility hidden in the mountains of Lower Silesia. There, engineers and scientists, working under the direct orders of Heinrich Himmler, were conducting classified experiments. Himmler, the leader of the dreaded Ahnenerbe, the Nazis' occult research division, was obsessed with unlocking ancient knowledge to ensure Germany's ultimate victory. But then, something went wrong. The few surviving reports speak of disastrous tests, scientists who vanished without a trace, and unexplainable side effects. Some declassified documents claim that, in the chaos of war's end, the Nazis tried to destroy Die Glocke, burying it deep along with the bodies of those who knew too much. I've seen a lot in war. I've watched men torn apart by landmines, heard soldiers scream as they burned alive inside flaming tanks, and witnessed prisoners of war reduced to walking skeletons. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on this mission. My name is Jonathan Graves, and to this day I don't know if I should be telling this story. Part of me wants to forget, to pretend none of it ever happened. But another part knows that even if I never speak of it again, it will never leave me. It was March 1945, near the war's end, when it was obvious that Hitler's days were numbered. I was part of a select unit tasked with missions that never made it into official reports, capturing Nazi scientists, retrieving sensitive documents, preventing advanced technologies from falling into the wrong hands. But this time, this mission was different. The order came directly from High Command. No written records, no documentation. All we were told was that we had to rendezvous with a Nazi defector named Dr. Klaus Reinhardt and follow his instructions to locate a secret laboratory hidden somewhere in the mountains of Lower Silesia. The objective? Recover whatever technology the Nazis had left behind before the Soviets could get to it. No one told us what we were looking for, only that it was big. Captain Harrington, our commanding officer, gathered the squad before departure. He was always a man of few words, cold and calculating. But that night, before we boarded the plane, he hesitated. "Gentlemen, what we're about to do will not be recorded. It will not be spoken of. If anyone asks, this never happened." The silence that followed was unsettling. We all knew he wasn't exaggerating. We were flown into a remote village, a place forgotten by both God and men. The moment we landed, the first thing I noticed was the biting cold of the mountains. The wind whistled through the ruins of bombed-out houses. The place smelled of death. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt was waiting for us inside the remains of a destroyed church. The first time I laid eyes on him, a chill ran down my spine. He didn't just look like a defector. He looked like a man who had already seen hell. Deep eye bags, pale skin, wide, restless eyes. He was shaking, like someone who hadn't slept in days. But it wasn't just exhaustion, it was fear. His English was thick with a German accent. His voice was weak, barely a whisper. "You're too late." I exchanged glances with the other soldiers. Just another paranoid Nazi scientist, right? Captain Harrington didn't flinch. "Explain yourself. What's inside that lab?" Reinhardt hesitated. He rubbed his face as if trying to gather his thoughts. Then he looked directly at me. I will never forget that look. "Whatever we find in there, you must be prepared to accept the impossible." That's when I felt it. For just a second, the air around us changed. The wind stopped. The world felt too quiet. I shook my head, trying to ignore the unnerving sensation. It was just the cold, or so I thought. What I didn't know was that this was the last moment of normality I would ever have. The radio crackled with interference as we approached the abandoned village. The wind howled through the dead trees, and the ground was covered in a thin layer of dirty snow. Everything about this place felt wrong. There were no signs of life. No lights, no sounds of animals, not even the crows we were used to seeing in war-torn cities. Just absolute silence. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt was hiding inside a crumbling church, a skeletal ruin of stone and wood with a collapsed roof. As we entered, our footsteps echoed through the dark interior. The place smelled of mold, burnt wax, and something else. Something metallic and acidic. A scent I wouldn't recognize until much later, inside the bunker. And then we saw him. Reinhardt sat on a wooden bench, trembling. The first thing I noticed was his appearance. He looked like a man on the brink of collapse. Pale skin, sunken and restless eyes, an unshaven face, and disheveled hair. But what unsettled me the most was his expression. He didn't look at us like a man seeking salvation. He looked at us like a man who had already accepted death. Captain Harrington stepped forward first, his hand firm on the grip of his pistol. "Dr. Reinhardt?" The scientist studied us for a long moment before finally standing. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself, but his voice still trembled when he spoke. "You came, but I think it's already too late." I exchanged glances with Evans, one of my squad mates. He rolled his eyes and muttered something about crazy scientists, but I didn't laugh. Something about this situation deeply unsettled me. Harrington wasn't one for small talk. "You said you had information about a Nazi lab, something important enough to justify this mission. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Reinhardt ran a hand over his face as if searching for the right words. He looked exhausted, haunted. "You don't understand. This isn't just a laboratory, it's a mistake. Something that should never have been created." He pointed to a leather satchel beside him and pulled out a bundle of yellowed papers. He unfolded one and handed it to us. I stepped forward, taking the fragile document carefully. It was a technical sketch, covered in German annotations. In the center, an illustration, a large cylindrical object with strange symbols etched around it. At the top of the page, one name stood out, Die Glocke. Reinhardt's voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid something might hear him. The bell. It was one of the Reich's top-secret experiments. They said it could generate infinite energy, maybe even be used as a weapon. But then, he swallowed hard before continuing. But it was much more than that. Nobody spoke. We just listened as he continued. They tried to bend time and space. The silence inside the church became heavier. Even Harrington hesitated for a moment before answering. "This sounds like science fiction, Doctor." Reinhardt laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of desperation. Science fiction? He turned to me, his eyes wide. I watched men vanish before my eyes. I saw time unravel inside that bunker. I saw people enter the chamber and come out. Different. My stomach twisted. The look in his eyes told me he wasn't lying. Reinhardt took a step closer. "We have to destroy everything now, before it's too late." Harrington's frown deepened. He was a pragmatic man, and the idea of blowing up an entire lab without seeing it first wasn't part of his protocol. He looked at me, then at the other soldiers. "We move out at dawn. We'll see this bunker with our own eyes." Reinhardt closed his eyes for a brief moment. as if he had just heard his death sentence, and honestly, maybe he was right. The forest felt dead. No sound of birds, no sign of animals. Just the cold wind rustling through the dry trees and the crunch of our boots on damp leaves. We walked for hours under a thick fog, wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. Reinhardt led the way, walking fast, as if he was desperate to get there, or maybe to run from something. He didn't talk much, only muttering scattered words in German, his breath uneven. "It's there," he finally said, pointing ahead. And then, we saw it. The bunker was a colossal structure of concrete hidden at the base of a rocky hill. The massive steel gate was partially covered in overgrown vegetation, but what really caught our attention were the blast marks around the entrance. Someone had tried to destroy it and failed. Captain Harrington didn't waste time. "Carter, set the explosives." We positioned ourselves while Carter worked. Reinhardt took a deep breath, his eyes locked on the gate, as if expecting something to come out at any moment. "Something's wrong," he muttered. The explosives detonated, shaking the steel gate with the impact. As the smoke cleared, we saw the entrance, damaged but still standing. We had to pry it open with crowbars until it finally gave way. And then the air changed. A shiver ran down my spine. The wind stopped. The world became too quiet. And then came the sound. A distant whisper mixed with a strange static-like noise. Faint but there, Evans turned to me. "Did you hear that?" I did. We all did. But no one wanted to admit it. Inside, the bunker was a dark labyrinth of concrete and steel, filled with dust and the heavy scent of rust and burnt oil. Our rifle-mounted flashlights barely lit the narrow, claustrophobic corridors. The silence inside was even worse than outside. Thick, pressing, like the air itself was carrying something unseen. We moved forward cautiously, our footsteps echoing. The feeling of being watched was almost tangible. Then Evan's watch stopped, or rather, it started moving backward. "This isn't right," he muttered, staring at the hands of his watch slowly turning in reverse. Carter checked his own watch. It was normal. Harrington frowned. "Probably interference. Keep moving." But it wasn't just the watch. The whispers returned, faint, distant, like voices floating through the empty corridors. And then we found the bodies. I had seen plenty of horrors in war, but nothing like this. The first bodies we found were Nazi scientists, still wearing their lab coats, collapsed on the floor. At first glance, they just looked like normal corpses, but as we got closer, something was wrong. They looked frozen in time. One of them lay face down, but one arm was still mid-motion, as if he had been trying to push himself up when he died, but never finished the movement. Another had his mouth open, an eternal silent. Scream frozen on his face. Evan stepped closer and touched one of them. The skin was as hard as stone, but the others were worse. One body was stretched out like it had been pulled in two opposite directions. His legs were separated from his torso, but there was no blood, no visible wounds, as if his body had been slowly torn apart over time. Another was bent over itself as if something unseen had crushed and folded him inward. That's when Reinhardt whispered something that sent ice through my veins. "Time." "Ate them?" I felt my breath hitch. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, pale as a ghost. "Time is distorted here. Some of them got trapped in moments that never ended. Others were consumed by space-time itself." My head spun. This was impossible. This couldn't be real. But the bunker stretched out before us, and we had no choice but to go deeper. The deeper we went into the bunker, the heavier it felt. The air was thick, suffocating, carrying a metallic, unnatural smell that clung to the back of my throat. The dust in the air moved too slowly, as if suspended in some invisible liquid. My stomach churned, my head pounded, and I wasn't the only one. Everyone looked affected. "Something's wrong," Evans muttered, rubbing his temples. The sensation was impossible to describe. It was like space itself had been warped, twisted in a way that human perception wasn't meant to understand. Sometimes the hallway ahead stretched, the walls pulling away from us. Other times it contracted without warning, shrinking the distance in an instant. "Stay focused, keep moving," Harrington ordered, but his voice was tight, and then it began. Evans suddenly stopped, his breathing sharp and uneven. You're seeing this, right?" I turned to him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something between terror and confusion. "Seeing what?" Evans took a step back, his rifle shaking in his hands. "That's me." I followed his gaze, and my blood turned to ice. At the end of the hallway, there was a body on the floor. It was him, same uniform, same gear, same face. But the other Evans lay twisted at an impossible angle, a gaping black hole in his chest, like something had erased that part of him from existence. Evans gasped, his hand moving to his own chest, as if feeling a wound that hadn't happened yet. This isn't real, but it was real enough for him. Harrington moved fast, grabbing Evans by the shoulder. "Snap out of it, soldier. It's in your head. Keep moving." Evans took a long second to react, then finally looked away. I blinked, and when I looked back, the body was gone. Then Carter's radio started crackling. He reached for his headset, his brows furrowing. "Something's interfering. I'm picking up a strange transmission. We all froze." "Transmission? There shouldn't be anyone else here." Carter twisted the dial, trying to clear the sound. And that's when we heard it, at first just static. Then words, German. But something was wrong with the voice. It was metallic, distorted like a scratched record playing in reverse. "Hier spricht. Das Experiment ist außer Kontrolle. Wir können nicht aufhören." The experiment is out of control. We can't stop it. Then another voice. But this one wasn't German. It wasn't human. A low guttural sound like an echo reverberating underwater. Words that didn't belong to any language I knew. Carter's hands clenched around his headset. "Stop! Get out of my head!" Then he screamed. McNamara snapped. He raised his rifle suddenly, eyes wide with panic, aiming at something in the darkness ahead. "There's someone there!" He fired. The gunshot thundered through the bunker, reverberating off the walls. But something was wrong. McNamara collapsed backward, blood pooling beneath him. We rushed to him. "What the hell happened?" I asked, dropping to my knees beside him. Carter's face was white as a corpse. He pointed at McNamara's rifle. "He shot himself." My throat went dry. "What?" Carter's hands shook. "He saw something. He fired. And the shot came back at him. That was impossible. But here, in this place, the impossible was becoming the rule. McNamara was alive, but in shock. Reinhardt knelt beside him, placing a buy, hand on his forehead as if checking his temperature. Then he murmured, "Die Glocke is still active." Captain Harrington snapped his head up. "What? What do you mean still active? You said the Nazis abandoned this place." Reinhardt slowly shook his head, his face grim. "I thought they had shut it down, but the machine, it's still running. On some level." He exhaled shakily. "If we don't shut it down completely, this will only get worse." Silence. We all knew what that meant. We had to keep going. We had to find Die Glocke before it found us first. We kept moving forward, knowing that with every step we were going deeper into something that shouldn't exist, something that felt like a mistake in reality itself. The bunker felt bigger inside than it should have been. The concrete walls had a subtle, impossible curve, and I had the strange feeling that the hallway shifted when we weren't looking. Carter was still pale after what happened with the radio. Evans hadn't spoken since he saw his own dead body. McNamara limped, clutching the wound on his shoulder. Captain Harrington kept everyone moving, but even he looked uneasy. But no one seemed stranger than Reinhardt. The scientist, who had once seemed like a terrified man running from his fate, now walked differently. More confident, more determined. His eyes shined with something I didn't like, and then we reached the main chamber. The hallway opened into a massive circular room, like an underground amphitheater carved into the mountain. And in the center of it, something was there, something colossal. something that looked like it was breathing, suspended by thick cables and partially connected to metallic tubes covered in symbols. There it was. Die Glocke, the bell. It wasn't golden or ornate, like the bells in churches. It was black as obsidian, with a strange glow like it absorbed the light around it. Its surface was smooth, no rivets, no bolts, just a seamless alien metal, and it was pulsing. The air around it seemed to shimmer, distorting our vision, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. But here, in this cold, dead bunker, there was no heat at all. Evans took a shaky breath, gripping his rifle tight. What the hell is this? Reinhardt stepped forward. It's the future. Harrington raised his gun instantly. Stay where you are, Doctor. But Reinhardt ignored him. He kept moving closer, entranced, staring at the machine as if he were looking at God himself. You don't understand. This is humanity's greatest achievement. I moved closer to Harrington, my gut telling me that Reinhardt hadn't been honest with us. Then I saw the floor, and a deep chill ran down my spine. The bodies were there. Dozens of scientists, collapsed in different positions, some with frozen expressions of horror, others kneeling as if they had fallen while praying. But the worst part? The symbols, drawn on the floor, written in something dark and dried, were circles, runes, and mathematical equations that made no sense. Harrington saw them too. He pointed to the markings. This doesn't look like science. Reinhardt smiled. Science and the occult walk hand in hand, Captain. The Nazis realized that too late. My heartbeat quickened. You knew. From the start, the scientist turned to me, still wearing that unnerving smile as if he had already accepted something we hadn't yet understood. I knew they tried, but they didn't know how to finish it. He turned back to the bell. I can finish it. Harrington cocked his weapon. Take one more step and I'll shoot. But Reinhardt didn't stop. He kept walking. The air around us vibrated violently. And then for the first time we heard the sound. The bell rang. It wasn't a normal sound. It was deep. Oh, something that shook inside our bones, inside our minds. It felt like time itself had been struck like a tuning fork. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Reinhardt never intended to destroy Die Glocke. He wanted to activate it. The sound was low, deep, a vibration that I felt inside my chest, inside my bones. It didn't echo like a normal bell. It was more like a whisper, as if each toll carried a distant sound, something lost in time. A chill ran through my entire body. Something was wrong. Captain Harrington raised his rifle. Doctor, I warned you, stop now. But Reinhardt didn't stop. He turned to us with an almost triumphant smile, as if we had just helped him complete something grand, something that should have never been completed. You don't understand. His voice was calm, almost reverent. I spent my entire life trying to reach this moment. And now, finally, it's here. He knelt down beside an old control panel, its buttons covered in dust, its dials cracked and broken. But he knew exactly what to do. And then, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then all of them turned purple. A supernatural violet glow filled the room, pulsing in sync with the sound of the bell. The ground beneath us trembled. What did you do? Harrington yelled, charging at Reinhardt. But before he could pull the trigger, time broke. The space around us began to bend and twist. The room flashed between different moments. I blinked, and for a split second, the bunker was brand new, shining, with Nazi scientists walking around, adjusting equipment, discussing theories. I blinked again, and it was ancient, as if we had been thrown thousands of years into the future. Dust and cobwebs covered everything. The bodies had rotted away, leaving only skeletons. One more blink, and I saw myself, dead. Own body, sprawled. On the floor, a burned hole in my chest, as if something had torn through me like fire. Evans screamed, I'm dying! I'm dying! I turned to him, but he was fine. He was seeing it. He was seeing a future where he died, right there in that room. McNamara's hands started shaking, his eyes wide with terror. There's something, his voice trembled, something in here with us, and then I saw it too. At the edges of the room, in the darkest corners, shadows began to move, but they weren't normal shadows. They were eyes, thousands of them, watching, waiting. Harrington fired his weapon, but the bullet never hit. It stopped in midair, suspended for a second, then dropped to the ground. Reinhardt laughed. "You still don't get it, do you?" His voice was filled with something new, something almost inhuman. "I never wanted to destroy Die Glocke. I wanted to finish it." He spread his arms like a priest at an altar. Time was never a straight line. It was never fixed. We were meant to move through it, to bend it to our will. He pointed toward the bell, now completely surrounded by a vortex of purple light and living shadows. "They promised to show me everything. The past, the future, eternity." And that's when I realized he wasn't talking about the Nazis. He was talking about the things inside the bell. Reality kept glitching. 1 second, we were here. The next, we were frozen in time. Then, we were in a future where the bunker was in flames, and I was the only one left standing. I saw McNamara get pulled backwards and disappear. I saw Carter get torn in half by something that wasn't even there. I saw Harrington pointing his gun at me, as if I was the traitor. And then, everything snapped back. The oscillation stopped, and Reinhardt was standing in front of the bell, ready to cross over. Harrington turned to me. "We have to stop him." And in that moment, I knew the truth. If we failed, there would be no world left to go back to. The bunker shook, and then came the sound. Not the bell anymore, but whispers. At first they were soft, almost imperceptible, like distant echoes traveling from somewhere far beyond. But as the violet glow pulsed through the room, the whispers grew louder, merging into a chaotic chorus. Strange, distorted languages. Some words were in German, but there was something else, something not meant for human ears. And then, space itself began to tear apart. The walls of the chamber started folding inward, like fabric being pulled in opposite directions. Cracks formed in the air. Not like doors, but like fractures in time itself. I saw things through them. In one, the bunker was in ruins, covered in dust and rubble, as if decades had passed in seconds. In another, I saw us, but something was wrong. McNamara had no eyes. Reinhardt stood among us, but his face was no longer human. Then the eyes began to appear. Blinking within the cracks, thousands of them watched us. Some were human, others were not. He stumbled backward, trying to escape one of the fractures in space. His face was pale as death, his eyes wide with terror. "No, no!" He tried to run, but then he simply disappeared, sucked into one of the cracks without a sound, without resistance. In the blink of an eye, he was just gone. No screams, no struggle, just absence. I turned to where he had been, and all that remained was a faint trail of dust floating in the air. McNamara fired his rifle into the shadows that emerged from the fractures. The bullets passed through, but did nothing. And then, Reinhardt laughed. He stood by the controls, his arms outstretched, his body trembling. But it wasn't normal trembling. He was duplicating, triplicating, tearing apart and reforming at the same time. One moment he was whole. The next, his skin was transparent, revealing dozens of versions of himself layered over each other, existing all at once. "I see everything," he screamed. "The past, the future, I am everything at once." His face shifted constantly. 1 second he looked young, the next, a rotting corpse. He laughed and screamed at the same time, his voice coming from different moments, different versions of himself. "I am everything, I am every moment, I am..." And then, he shattered into 1,000 versions of himself. The entire bunker was shaking. The cracks in reality were expanding. The shadows were closing in. And at the center of the chamber, Die Glocke pulsed. The sound was growing louder, stronger. And that's when I realized the bell was the key. If we didn't destroy it now, we would be erased from time as well. The bunker shook with a deafening roar. The ground vibrated beneath my feet. and dust rained down from the cracked ceiling, as if the entire mountain was collapsing on top of us. We had to get out. Now! Carter, explosives, now! Captain Harrington shouted, his voice firm even amidst the chaos. Carter scrambled to his pack, his hands shaking as he pulled out the detonators, but I could barely focus on what he was doing. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The bell was ringing, but now, the sound wasn't just coming from it. It was inside my head. It was a strange melody, like a song with no origin, like time itself was singing, and then I saw them. At first I thought they were the other soldiers, but they weren't. They were versions of me. One was wounded, clutching a bleeding wound in his abdomen. Another was much older, hair gray, eyes hollow. And then there was one that barely looked human. His skin thin as paper, his eyes deep like black holes. They moved around me, like layered shadows, living and dying at the same time. "Do you see this?" My voice came out weak. But no one answered, because they were there too. I saw Carter, or what was left of him, his form flickering between flesh and ashes. I saw McNamara, his face dissolving in fragmented time, his skin shifting through ages like a film playing in fast forward. Versions of ourselves were trapped between moments, echoing through alternate pasts and possible futures. And at the center of it all, Die Glocke pulsed. The air around it twisted, bending the light, creating impossible shadows. The black metal vibrated like a heartbeat on the verge of bursting. The sound coming from it was no longer just a chime. It was a call to something on the other side. I felt it when it came out of the bell. It was invisible but real, like a wind blowing out from inside the machine. Something that was never meant to exist here. Harrington didn't hesitate. "Detonate!" Carter armed the explosives, but something grabbed him before he could run. He was yanked backward as if invisible hands had seized him. His scream echoed as he vanished into thin air, sucked into the bell. The explosives were set. We had seconds. "Run!" I screamed. McNamara stumbled and fell. I tried to grab him, but his body began to disintegrate before my eyes. His flesh turned to sand, to mist, to nothing. He evaporated. Harrington and I were the only ones who made it to the exit. I looked back, just for a second, and I saw Reinhardt, or what was left of him. His body was still there, but it never stopped changing. He was young, then old, then a skeleton, then a baby, then a dying man. He was all his versions at once. He looked at me and smiled. The walls collapsed behind us. Harrington and I ran through the crumbling bunker, the explosion roaring behind us like thunder echoing through time. And then, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, we were outside. The bunker was gone. Not buried, not destroyed, just gone. The cold wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time since we entered that place, there was no more sound. The bell had stopped, but something inside me knew. It wouldn't stay silent forever. By the time we emerged from the forest, the sky was starting to lighten. The icy air burned my lungs, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. Behind us, the mountain trembled. The bunker was collapsing. The explosives Carter had planted had done their job, and now, all of it, Die Glocke, the shadows, the tears in time, would be buried under tons of stone and concrete. Or at least that's what we hoped. Harrington and I fell to our knees on the cold ground, exhausted. I looked around, trying to count how many of us had made it out. Only 2. Carter, McNamara, Evans. All gone. No bodies. Nothing. Harrington took a deep breath and stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead. His eyes met mine, and I already knew what he was going to say before he even opened his mouth. "This mission never happened, Graves. You know that." I just nodded. What else could I do? No one would ever believe us. High Command would erase any mention of what we had found. No word about Die Glocke. No word about Reinhardt. The files would be destroyed. We were never there. Then, I heard it. Faint, distant, the bell. My blood ran cold. I turned to Harrington, waiting to see if he had heard it too. but he just sighed and turned away, walking toward the extraction point. "Let's go, Graves, it's over." But it wasn't, not for me, because as I stood up, the bell was still ringing. I returned home to the United States, trying to reclaim a normal life. But something inside me was wrong. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, always to the same sound echoing in my ears. The bell. Sometimes in my dreams, I was back in that bunker. The heavy air, the violet light pulsing, Reinhardt staring at me, but his face kept changing. Young, old, rotting, deformed. And he was smiling. Always smiling. "You never left, Graves." I'd wake up gasping, feeling like time itself was unstable around me, like something had been wrong since that day. I tried to forget. I tried to convince myself that everything was buried beneath the mountain, that the bunker was destroyed, that Die Glocke was gone forever. It was a cold morning when I found the envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no postmark, just a single folded piece of paper inside. I opened it with trembling hands. There was only one sentence written in firm, meticulous handwriting. "The bell still rings, and soon it will ring for you too." My blood ran cold. I looked around expecting to see someone watching me, but the street was empty. The wind blew, and for a brief moment I was sure I heard it, faint, distant, calling. I know what it means. One day it will pull me back, and next time, there will be no escape. If you enjoyed this video and want more terrifying stories, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring even more chilling content. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Drop a comment below. What do you think about Die Glocke? Just a myth or something real? See you in the next video, unless the bell rings first.